Morning jazz. So that's Freddie, right? Amazing. Anyone got any thoughts about that? Oh, Susan.
No, I'd like to hear from other people first, but I'd like to say something as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
hear from other.
It started off so simply, and then it just kind of came out of nowhere with all these runs everywhere. It was
Yeah.
kind of cool.
It's kind of like the instrument takes over. Like, there's no thought behind it. I'd love to be able to play music like that, but I don't think you could ever put it on paper.
Yeah. I
And
mean, there's a lot of practice behind it. Anyone else? Matt and Grace.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it did start off kind of calmly, and then it's sort of as if we were losing ourselves in it, and then all of a sudden he's playing all these runs, and I'm kind of thinking, whoa, where did this come from? But yeah.
Anyone else got any thoughts about it? It's great to listen to a record like that all the way through, or a track like that, and just hear what everyone does with it. Because, yeah, Freddie is like a real journey soloist. He's like, his solos often start out really sparse, and then he's just, he just catches fire, and it's like, get out of the way. George Coleman, the saxophone player on that track, is much more like, much more ordered. It's this is the great thing about improvising, and all music that you play has your personality comes out, but improvising is just like, this is what I'm like. Imagine if you could play music with that much freedom, where you're like, I played a wrong note, who cares? That's not actually what's important. If you put that right down the bottom of your list of things that are important, like, imagine the music you play, and you probably make less mistakes as well, like, as a result, because you're not, it's not this right or wrong binary world of like, yeah, there's correct and there's incorrect and there's nothing in between. Like Miles Davis is a good example of that. Like, if we listened to So What last week, let me try and find it.
I think Stephanie wanted to jump in.
Oh yeah, go for it while I find this.
I was going to add to what Susan was saying, and just like reflecting on my own struggle. I was like thinking about, making the rhythm interesting, but I tend to like lose track of which bar I'm at or which beat I'm at. And then so that feeling of like, I need to follow where the chart is, but then I wanted to make the rhythm interesting and I lost track. So it's kind of like that push and pull sort of feeling.
Yeah, but that can be really liberating if you actually don't know where you are. That sort of takes away that right or wrong thing for you, in a way. If you just decide, I'm just gonna follow my ears and just see what happens, it can be really freeing. Just like a mistake can be the catalyst for a really interesting thing in your solo.
It was like when you played the recording the first time of just the straight recording, not the backing track, and we were sitting here listening to it, and I was like, I don't know where the beat is.
Yeah. Of Maiden Voyage.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because it's
Particularly like the hi-hat was doing some weird rhythm that didn't feel like it was connected with the like underlying beat or that was going on in other instruments, and I was like, where are we? And then Susan said, oh well, that's cool that you don't know.
Yeah, totally. And that's Tony Williams as well on the drums. He was 19 when he recorded that. Just in case you didn't feel bad about yourself.
Sometimes I'm like playing something I thought that was interesting, but then they changed the to the next bar or next mode, and I was like, no, I'm not finished yet.
Yeah, exactly.
one tip I got, Steph, working with like soloing and stuff, is that if it sounds wrong, either go up or down a semitone, and that will usually help make it sound right to our ears.
Thanks. Good tip.
Yeah, you're only a semitone away from a nice note. That is a very good way of thinking of it. Hey, I'm
just like dig in harder. If it sounds wrong, then go like, oh, I'm gonna just live for this dissonance right now.
so I'm just gonna share. So this is Miles. This was the first track of the album Kind of Blue, which at the time it wasn't, they weren't like, let's make a revolutionary album, but it did certainly end up being that way. But it's just like his approach was like, well, that's color, that's character. It just doesn't matter. It is just not important.
For any non-brass players, just so you know what Ed's referring to, because you might not have been able to hear it, there were some notes that Miles didn't hit the center of the note, and they were a bit slidey, is the only way to describe it. And that is absolute like death and destruction to a brass player, is to do what he just did and for that to be acceptable in our world. So just so you know, it's like, yeah, you would never know, but nobody in the classical world would ever accept that. Is that right? A fair way of putting it?
Well, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I think in this conversation that we're having about like go for it and like
That's
live
what
the
I mean.
mistakes, that I think for all of us in practice as well, and this was kind of something we talked about last week with Anne and the Alexander technique stuff, is that you kind of, like Ed's been saying, you have to be willing to like have those blips and those weird things, because you're not going to get to that amazing stuff if you're not willing to like
stumble a little
stumble
bit.
and stuff. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. The stumble, it's awesome. It's so awesome that he chose to let that go, a tiny technical thing go, because the storytelling was so strong in his solo.
Well, what he was saying by leaving it in was, this isn't about that. This isn't about perfection. If you want that's why we paint instead of just have photos. Like, we want your impression of this phrase. We want your imperfection. That's why we listen to this sort of music, because it, makes us feel, connected on a human level.
Well, and I think that's what we want to do in our orchestra music as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That we want everyone's personality to come out in the music, so that, VYSO's performance of something is different to the MSO or like MYO or like whoever. That it's this combination of these people with like these musical personalities going for it.
Yeah, well, it's trickier with composed music. You've got a composer to think of. So it is.
There's the composer.
Yeah, you should always be thinking about the composer and how amazing they are. Yeah, I mean, I think Susan's right. It'd be great. Like, obviously, you can't play you can't play a concerto full of wrong notes and just go, hooray, I made mistakes, aren't I amazing? But I think what we're trying to get to is like the same thing in jazz, the same thing in all types of music. If you lock yourself into whether I made a mistake or not, it's just a drainer. It's just death to your expression. Have you ever been on a gig with a player who is incredible? They played an amazing thing and they come off stage and they're just like, oh, did you hear that mistake? And you're like, what? Like, what you did was transported me to another universe, and you're on the mistake. It's like, I would love to be able to get to that stage where it's like, yeah, I'm a human, and that's like right down the hierarchy of things. It was that whether it was 100% of the notes I played were perfect and without blemish.
What Ed just described of people having done a great performance and then coming off stage and focusing on the one mistake, that happens to me every VYSO concert when you all come off stage. Like, it's been an amazing performance. Like, and if you did a statistical analysis of like every single variation of a thing that you do, maybe Matt could apply some maths for us, of like every single pitch decision, intonation decision, like rhythm, dynamics, like the millions of notes and decisions that get made in a concert, and like a couple like didn't go as planned, and that like tiny 0.0001% of things is people come up and say, I'm so sorry, like, oh, I flipped that note in that solo, or like, oh, I'm so sorry, I was out of tune on that one note in like the fourth movement. It's like, what? Like, it was so good.
What if you have like terrible oral skills? Like, where would you start?
Who's saying that?
Cara.
Asking for a friend? I would first reframe terrible oral skills, because you don't need that description. Just like put that to one side. I think there's something for. I mean, transcribing stuff feels completely overwhelming. In most cases, you'll find that it's easier than you think it's going to be, and you get better at it really fast. So, if you feel like your oral skills are weak, and you want to transcribe a phrase from a solo, just keep replaying the first note until you can play along with it, and then the first two notes. Ba-da, da-da, cool. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da. And if that's all you get for that day, no problem. Add a note the next day, add a note the next day. And that's the way it works. It doesn't matter how your oral skills are. That's everyone starts at that place when you're transcribing. Just go one note at a time. Just make the goal really, really small, and you'll get there. But I think actually I'm serious about that reframing of how you feel about your own skills. That's not. You don't need to worry about that. It's not up to you to put yourself in a category of good or bad oral skills. I think just take it one note at a time, and you'll succeed. Anyone else?
Does anyone want to jump in and share like what they might have found useful or interesting in today and 2 weeks ago with doing this improv? Because this is kind of totally like out of our zone.
It's very un-youth orchestra.
It's very un-orchestra.
Actually, I'll add to that. If you've got a question that you feel is really rudimentary, and you'll feel like an idiot, ask that, because I promise you there'll be other people who have the same question. I might have used a word like obviously when you were like, that wasn't obvious to me. That's cool. The mode stuff is just like, for me it's like,
how to work out, sorry.
What was that?
And like, so you say these have modes, but like they're written in chords. So how do you always like pick out the chord and assign a mode to it when the chord just doesn't have a scale worth of notes?
Oh yeah, see, that's a great question. So the question was, who was that?
Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie. So a chord is just that. It's not a scale. It's an arpeggio that you play at the same time. So how does a scale fit over that? The way I think of it is every chord has a scale that best fits. So the scale that best fits the dominant 7 chord is the Mixolydian scale. That's not really a rule as such. It's just like we know about this scale and we know that all the notes in the scale are consonant with the 4 notes in that chord. So yeah, the scale, you get to know the scales that best fit with certain chords. And that's where modes are good, because you can, for most sort of basic chords, you can assign a degree of the major scale, a mode, to that chord symbol that fits. Does that answer your question? Or bring up more questions?
I've got a question related to that.
Yeah.
So if you had a piece that was in, I don't know, let's say C major for argument's sake.
Yeah.
So like the key signature of the piece, like a jazz piece, was C major, and then you've got chords that are built on like different degrees of that scale. So like say you've got a G7 chord, like the 5/7 chord, then is that just the are you just playing different modes like from C major?
No, when you, probably the rule of thumb for playing jazz standards is that the key signature is irrelevant. Like you say, let's play Days of Wine and Roses in F, because you know, you can talk about the key that a song is in, but the key signature relating to the chords, don't bother. It's not important. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah. I think so.
Let's go for all the way answering your question.
Well, okay, so as an example, let me see if I can find something that would make sense. So, all right, so I've got this book, which I might talk about this book as well. So this is a book of like a bunch of jazz pieces, right? And it's got the tune written and then it's got chords over the top. This is just for everyone else. I'll write it in the chat what it is. And it's got B flat key signature.
Yep.
And then it's B flat blues. So it's the chords are B flat 7, B flat 7, E flat 7, B flat 7, F, E flat, B flat, B flat. So if I played, would I be playing in like B flat Ionian, or would I be playing in B flat Mixolydian?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So first of all, a blues is a special example where a dominant chord is a 1 chord.
Okay.
Oh.
It's like it's a what do you call it? An exception
Okay.
to the rule,
That example.
which is annoying because blues are like the first thing you learn. But the best way to describe it is like having a key signature on a blues is problematic for the reason that you said. If it's the key signature is B flat and the first chord is a B flat 7, you're like already that's the tonic chord, but it's a dominant chord. That's like doesn't quite make sense. The simplest, most consonant thing you can do with the blues is play the Mixolydian mode over every dominant 7 chord. So you'd go B flat Mixolydian and then E flat Mixolydian and so on.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because if you played Ionian, then you'd have a natural 7, which would jar with the flat 7 of the chord. I'm seeing people's eyes rolling back in their head.
Sorry, that became overly complicated.
It's one of those subject areas where it's like the simplest question has the most complicated answer. That's jazz. Any more complicated questions or easy ones or whatever? Anything you've always wanted to know but felt too dumb to ask? I've got heaps of those, but this isn't about me.
is it common that like solos that people have come up with, like you mentioned with Miles Davis, become like just the melody that everybody knows of a tune, and therefore like becomes less improvised over time, maybe because it's just like a standard way of playing it. I don't know.
I think. Do you mean like in a solo section of a song that the version becomes so famous that people start to imitate it? Is that what you're saying, Cara? I think it's generally frowned upon. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. The famous recordings of tunes have a huge influence on how people play that tune forever. But more with stuff like tempo and feel and approach. You don't get into improvising if you want to play other people's solos and not your own. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Feel like you have to be like so brave to play jazz well.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. Brave feels like a strange word to use because, yeah, I guess so. But when you are in a place where you feel like you've got enough skill that you know what to do, you're not completely lost, and you've got enough you've lost enough inhibitions that people can watch you and you don't freak out. It's actually a very natural, lovely thing to do. It doesn't feel difficult. It doesn't feel like you need to steel yourself and be brave. Once you realize, the reason I was drawn to jazz is because, we're talking about making mistakes and stuff. No one can tell you you're wrong. No one can go, you improvised that wrong. It's like, no, I didn't. Impossible. Yeah, okay, none of the notes I played were in any of the chords. I was Schoenberging it, but you can't be wrong, and that I've found that really freeing. Like really, just like, oh sweet, I can just play a long note and then silence, and then just play a couple of notes and then silence. It was just like ecstasy for me to be able to do that, and you literally can't be wrong, You've put yourself in this paradigm where wrong and right aren't in it. They're not players in the game.
And I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What is the best jazz or improvised instrumentalist that you like on a very non-traditional jazz instrument?
Non-traditional jazz instrument.
I was going to ask similar things. Is there an instrument that you wouldn't recommend that to play jazz on?
Recommend? No, absolutely not. There are instruments that are better suited. This is going to be controversial because there are a lot of string players in the room, but string instruments suffer partly from just like historically not many people have played jazz on them, but I think different instruments have their different things that they're good at, and attack isn't one of the things you'd say that a string instrument is naturally, string players obviously disagree. Of course we can attack, but there's something about the more percussive instruments that make it. I mean, French horn is the same thing because the attack of the French horn doesn't happen at the very start of the note, like it does on the trumpet. It sort of more blooms. Are you offended by that, Ingrid? It's more of a blooming sound, like a string instrument. Yeah, exactly. It's like less conducive to like the percussive nature of jazz, which is only to say it's just like that's a challenge that those players have. It absolutely doesn't exclude you from playing it, um, because it's about how you express yourself. It's just like the instrument you play doesn't matter. Bella Fleck is probably one of the people that comes to mind. He's a banjo player, um, and an improviser. I mean, you don't really associate banjo with jazz or improvising. Um,
It's not totally jazz, but there's this really cool album that Bela Fleck is on with Yo-Yo Ma. So
oh
Yo-Yo
yeah,
Ma, everyone knows, is like being ultra classical, but he also does heaps of like world music crossover stuff. And yeah, their album is called The Goat Rodeo Sessions. It's really good.
uh,
Bass player on there, I can't remember the bass player's name. And Edgar Meyer. Yeah.
Edgar Meyer. Another bass player, Renaud Garcia Font, is a he's insane. He's a plays lots of classical stuff as well, and his thing is like playing in the harmonics on the double bass. Like so a lot of his recordings sound like he's playing violin because he's playing so high, but he's an amazing double bass, crossover person. Um, who's great to listen to? This is not a non-traditional jazz instrument, but if you've ever heard of Bobby McFerrin, um, he's just got a different vibe. There's a great album. Okay, with Chick Corea. Album Play. It's called Play. And Chick Corea is a pianist, and Bobby McFerrin is a vocalist, and the album is just the two of them just playing, and it's one of my favorites. I haven't actually listened to it in years and years, but it's such a great album because Bobby does obviously sings melodies with words, some without words. There are passages where he plays the role of the double bass and does like a walking bass line and just like swings his ass off. Um, he's a great kind of left of center jazz practitioner who has the respect of the jazz community and is a vocalist, which is slightly unusual, unfortunately. Anyone else?
Just slightly off. I don't know if it's off topic or not. In terms of sharing solos, any tips around that? Because I found it hard to navigate when I should be responding, or like how long I should be playing, like a phrase for example.
Uh, a f- you mean when there's a few people on the bandstand and everyone wants a solo? How long do you
I
play
think
for?
sort of. I'm thinking specifically because I once again I was on placement and working with the Latin band, which isn't really Latin band, but I was trying to solo with one of the other students and just sort of have that conversation. But we kind of both kept trying to play over each other, or I think because we feel the music the same way, we didn't quite get that back and forth happening so smoothly.
Yeah. Well, it's a relationship, and like any relationship, it's you're not always going to be on the same page. Who's being cheeky about trumpet players? Oh, I see. Um, yeah, I mean, it's the thing I will say about how long your solos go for and letting other people have the limelight and taking it for yourself. It is a bit of a complicated thing because if you always shrink back into the background and let other people do it, then you are not expressing yourself very well at all because you're letting other people step up. So you have to assert yourself in a situation like that. But there's a point that you get to where people don't want to play with you anymore. Like he's asserting himself too much. I don't like it.
Kim, I wonder, because as classical musicians, we are side by side players, right? But in jazz combos, they're much closer together and they're often looking at each other. So I wonder whether if it's with a student, like Ingrid and I, when we were having our scatty McScat conversation and playing, it was pretty obvious we were like using a lot of non-verbal. Well, obviously we were playing, but there's a lot of physicality in the handing the phrase to and from each other. So I wonder if you are actually looking at the student and using your body to lead into the handover, whether that might make it a bit smoother.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
good advice.
totally.
I mean, there are ways you can, yeah, when a solo transfers from one person to another, there's very rarely, with good bands, there's very rarely confusion about it. And if there is, it's resolved very quickly because someone goes, "Okay, it's you're off. We're all here for the same purpose. We want to make good music." So I was going to keep going, but I'll stop. But there are ways you can. I'll do my impression of someone who's finished playing a solo. Okay, I'll stay seated. Like you're sort of just like winding it back.
Everyone's smiling. Maybe we should do that at the start of every VYSO rehearsal. It's like a doobie
Bye, everyone.
La la la.
Yeah.